He handed me a glass of wine, chilled stemmed with a peach undertone just how I liked it. I smiled, then passed it sweetly to the woman he thought I didn't know about. She raised it, clinked it with his, drank. And 10 minutes later, she collapsed. Not a soul at that rooftop dinner saw it coming. But I did, because while he was planning to erase me, I was preparing to let the whole room see who he really was. Where are you listening from? Don't forget to subscribe for more true revenge stories. My name is Marlo Ainsley. I'm 38 years old, a financial planner in Portland, Oregon. On paper, my life looked perfect. A lakeside house in Selwood, a thriving career, and a daughter who paints her dreams in watercolor. And Grant, my husband of 15 years. He was the kind of man people admired, CEO of a healthcare tech firm, charming in the way only practiced men are. People called us a power couple. And for a long time, I believed it. We had our routines, Sunday farmers markets, evenings with jazz vinyl and red wine. Our daughter Ivy, 12, always drawing in the corner, asking the kinds of questions that made adults pause. We were preparing to celebrate our 15th wedding anniversary. Grant insisted on something special, a rooftop dinner at a boutique hotel overlooking the Willamette River. He curated everything: golden lights, a soft jazz trio, guest list of 35 hand-picked friends, colleagues, and family. Even the floral arrangements had citrus notes, Blythe's favorite, though I didn't know that yet. I wore gold like he asked, a satin dress that caught the light just right. My hair curled, my heels just tall enough to feel like armor. Ivy helped me choose my earrings. She said I looked like someone ready for something important. At the venue, everything shimmered. The rooftop terrace was dressed in fairy lights. Champagne towers glistened beside charcuterie boards. There was laughter, polite clinks of crystal, soft chatter about grants and IPOs. The scent of river breeze, wine, and gardenia drifted through the evening. It felt like a magazine spread. Too perfect. Grant greeted everyone with that warm smile of his, the one that made people lean and lower their guard. He held my hand like we were still newlyweds. Whispered, "Tonight's for you." And maybe once I would have believed that. But lately my instincts had sharpened. Not from paranoia, from pattern. Patterns I'd learned to recognize in financial audits. Small inconsistencies, pauses in storylines, numbers that didn't add up. And Grant, he'd started to skip beats. His schedule changed. His phone was always face down. His compliments felt rehearsed. Kisses landed slightly to the side. Nothing obvious, just noise beneath the music. Women like me don't react to one red flag. We respond to the pattern. And while the string quartet played something soft and familiar, I sipped my wine and watched my husband perform. I scanned the room, locking faces. Friends I trusted, clients I'd once advised. And near the bar, her forest green dress, blonde curls, laugh like champagne bubbles. Blythe Kerrigan, introduced as an old colleague, hugged me like a sister, said I looked radiant. I'd never met her before that night. But she already knew which flute was mine, and he knew which one I'd raise. But trust isn't something you lose overnight. It dies in silence, then explodes in a toast. It started with small things. Grant stopped looking me in the eyes when he spoke. He used to glance up between emails, hold my gaze just long enough to make me feel seen, anchored. Now, he blinked past me, as if I were ambient noise. He changed the password on his phone, said it was for work compliance, new IT policy at the firm. I didn't ask twice, but I remembered his old password. It was Ivy's birthday. His new one, no clue. And then there were the touches, or rather, the absence of them. For 15 years, Grant had this way of brushing my shoulder as he walked past, or tracing my palm during movies like. His hand needed to check if mine was still there. Now when he passed behind me in the kitchen, his body turned slightly like avoiding a draft. When I kissed him goodbye one morning, he winced. I said nothing. Because what do you even say? One Tuesday night, Ivy looked up from her homework and said, "Why does Dad always smile when he's texting?" I froze. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "He smiles like giggles, not like when he talks to us." I managed a laugh. Maybe he's texting someone funny from work. She nodded unfazed. Went back to math. But I stood at the sink staring into the dark window. My own reflection looking back, blurred, tired, a little unfamiliar. Grant wasn't unkind. That's what made it harder to name. He still brought me coffee in the mornings, still reminded Ivy to wear her coat, still booked us dinner for our anniversary. But kindness without connection, it's just theater. He was going through the motions like a man rehearsing a life he no longer felt part of. And I started reading between silences, tracking the patterns. The Tuesday gym sessions that suddenly became strategy meetings. The way his phone never left his pocket even during dinner. The faint trail of cologne on his collar at 10 p.m., a brand he didn't own. Still, I said nothing. Because saying something makes it real. And maybe, just maybe, I was overthinking. Or maybe I was already being erased. A week before our anniversary, Grant said he had to fly to Denver. Medical tech conference, he told me, pulling on his navy blazer. 2 days. I'll be back Friday night. I asked if he needed anything packed. He kissed my forehead, already handled. It was ordinary, too ordinary. That Thursday, I opened our shared laptop to double-check a client file. His browser was still up, booking.com. I wasn't looking for anything, not really, but a tab caught my eye: confirmation email. Spa retreat, 2 guests, room upgrade. Under the reservation. G. Ainsley, Blythe K. I didn't blink. I just stared. Not Denver, not a conference. A Lakeview suite at a wellness lodge in Bend. Couples massage, floral bath soak. A wine pairing menu for 2. No work badge required. I scrolled once, then closed the laptop slowly. I didn't cry, didn't storm into the hallway, didn't call. I just sat at the kitchen island watching the coffee machine hum. My husband of 15 years had planned a romantic weekend, and not with me. 2 days later, when he came home, I was folding laundry. Ivy was asleep. The house was quiet. He walked in with a gift bag inside a gold necklace. Elegant, clean, unpersonal. A little early anniversary surprise. He smiled. Denver was exhausting. I smiled back. So many doctors. He nodded. And pharma reps. You know the type. That was the first time he said her name. We were sitting on the porch. He poured us wine. Oh, Blythe might be at the anniversary party, he said casually. Remember her used to work with me at Alderhill before she switched to private care. I shook my head. I don't think I know her. He waved a hand. You must have heard me mention her at some point. We just reconnected on LinkedIn. 15 years. He'd never once said her name, but now it dropped so easily like a stone he'd practiced skipping. I looked at him, wine glass in hand, golden light catching the side of his face. Is she bringing someone, I asked? He blinked. A half-second pause. Probably just herself. And just like that, I knew. This wasn't a slip. It was a script. The spa weekend. The staged mention. The gift to cover guilt. And I sat in my own home, holding the lies like glass in my palm. Not sharp enough to bleed, but clear enough to see through. Would you confront him now, or wait and watch? The night I found it, I wasn't even snooping. Grant had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter. He'd run upstairs to take a call. I was looking for an old invoice I'd saved in our shared folders, something harmless. But the downloads folder caught my eye. Inside a PDF. Simple title. Dosage. QRX compound. I clicked. It was a pharmacy invoice from a place I'd never heard of. Out of state. Compound listed. Diazotyl P liquid. Unmarked. Dosage. 2.5 milliliter per serving. Causes disorientation, short-term memory loss, and temporary incapacitation. Non-detectable in standard blood panels. I read it again, then again. A heat spread across my chest, not anger. A hollow ice-burned shock. What was this? I backed out of the folder, opened his email out of instinct. Search QRX. Nothing. Search compound. 1 hit. A forwarded message already archived. Subject line. Riaz discussed. Compound timeline. Sender unlisted. Private client domain. But below that, another thread. Titled simply, Del Q. I opened it, and there it was. An email from Blythe. Blythe Kerrigan. Are you sure this is safe? Grant Ainsley. She won't even remember. It just slows things down. That was all. No preamble, no context. But I didn't need any. She won't even remember. Not we should tell her. Not maybe we shouldn't do this. Just assurance, calculation. And it wasn't about love. It was about control. I sat there in my own kitchen, the dim under-cabinet lights casting long shadows across the tile. I didn't scream. I didn't shake. I just saved the file to a USB drive I used for taxes and quietly logged out. Then I poured myself a glass of water, held it in both hands, watched it tremble slightly, not from my fingers, but from the truth settling inside me like a stone. He wasn't just cheating. He was planning something else. To silence me, to drug me, to confuse me long enough for what to make a move, shift accounts, file something I wouldn't remember. Whatever it wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure, cold, precise, painless if I never knew. But I did, and now I couldn't unknow it. I looked up toward the stairs. His voice floated down from the bedroom, calm, light, like nothing in the world was wrong. What would you do if you found proof your husband was planning your silence? That night I started packing. Not clothes, just papers. I printed the pharmacy email, the booking confirmation, the messages between Grant and Blythe. I slipped them into a folder, neat, silent, clinical. Then I sat down at my desk, opened a blank page, and wrote, "And to whom it may concern, I'm filing for divorce. On the grounds of intentional harm, emotional abuse, and planned manipulation. I typed steadily, without pause. 15 years distilled into 7 paragraphs. I signed it, dated it, folded it once. I planned to leave after the anniversary party. Quietly, no drama, just disappear with Ivy, start fresh. But life doesn't let you leave quietly when something inside you is still burning. Ivy knocked on my door that night, barefoot in pajamas. Couldn't sleep, she said, curling up on my bed. Her head rested on my arm, small, warm. After a moment, she whispered, "Are you okay, Mom?" I hesitated. "Just tired, honey." She didn't respond right away. Then quietly she asked, "Is Dad lying to you?" I froze. She looked up. "You don't laugh like before. He doesn't look at you like he used to." I blinked fast, held her tighter. "Ivy," she cut in soft but certain. "Whatever's happening, don't let them win." I felt it in my chest like a thread snapping. Don't let them win. My 12-year-old, who still braided friendship bracelets and built fairy houses in the garden, she saw everything. I couldn't walk away. Not just because of the betrayal, but because leaving quietly meant accepting his narrative. Letting him sip champagne in front of our families. Letting Blythe smile in her green dress thinking she'd replaced me. No, I would not be replaced. He chose a rooftop. He chose guests, lights, champagne, jazz. He built a stage, so I would give him a show. I took the folder, locked it in my desk. The letter to my attorney scheduled to send if I didn't check in by midnight after the party. The files backed up, copied, hidden. Then I looked in the mirror. My face was pale, my mouth a firm line. But my eyes, steel. I wasn't just preparing to leave. I was preparing to finish something, and maybe begin again. Should I expose him in silence, or make it unforgettable? I found our wedding album the night before the party. It had been tucked away in the top shelf of the linen closet, dusty, untouched. I sat on the edge of the bed, flipped through pages that once meant everything. There we were, barefoot by the river, smiling beneath a spray of summer wildflowers. His hand on my waist, my eyes closed, trusting. One photo stopped me. The proposal. We were at Columbia River Gorge, mist in the air, my hair damp. Grant knelt on a mossy stone, holding a ring with trembling fingers. "I'll protect you forever," he said. I had believed him fully, deeply, without condition. Now, 15 years later, I was hiding evidence from that same man. A man who once memorized my coffee order, now planned my disorientation like a dosage schedule. I stood, carried the album back to the closet, shut the door. Then I walked to the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't grieving. She wasn't scared. She was sharpened. Steel, not glass. I pulled out my gold satin dress, the one he'd said would photograph well under candlelight. Fine, let it shine. I packed the USB drive in my clutch right beside my lipstick. 3 backup copies, one hidden at the sound booth, one auto-scheduled to email my lawyer at 12:01 a.m. if I didn't check in. Grant thought this party was his moment, his script, his power play. But tomorrow, when he handed me that glass, he wouldn't know I was already ready. I wasn't the woman he married anymore, and I wasn't going to sip. I was going to serve. I approached this like any major investment negotiation. Step 1, secure the data, 3 copies each encrypted. One saved on a hidden drive in my office, behind a drawer of family photos. One uploaded to a password-protected cloud I hadn't used since grad school. And the final on a slim silver USB drive tucked behind the lining of my clutch. Step 2, set the failsafe. I drafted an email to my attorney. Attached every file, the pharmacy invoice, screenshots of messages, the booking confirmations, and a list of names who would be in attendance that night. Subject line, in case I disappear. I set it to auto-send at 12:01 a.m. If I didn't manually cancel it, it would go out to her inbox and a journalist I once advised financially who owed me a favor. Step 3, control the environment. The venue had an audio booth tucked behind the back of the rooftop bar. I'd confirmed it during the walkthrough Grant thought was too detail-oriented. Perfect. The day before the party, I asked Ivy to help me test my old phone's hidden camera app. We placed it inside my evening clutch facing slightly upward. From the outside, it looked like an old decorative clasp. But inside it would record everything. My eye contact, his gestures, the glass. Then came the timing. I confirmed when speeches would happen, when the quartet would take a break. I marked the exact moment Grant always chose to make his toast, roughly 7:45 every year. I reviewed every possible variable. The only one I couldn't control was her, Blythe. Would she even show? If she didn't, then what? But part of me knew she would. Mistresses rarely skipped their moment of arrival. The evening sun was still brushing the Willamette River when I stepped onto the rooftop. Warm gold lighting, silver-rimmed glassware, jazz playing low, the scent of citrus and gardenia curled through the air. I wore the dress he'd asked for, Gold satin simple neckline, subtle shimmer. Hair swept to one side, lips matte, eyes unflinching. A few guests turned, smiled. Grant was already there, center of the room, wine glass in hand, surrounded by 2 investors and his college roommate. He spotted me, smiled like it was still year 5 instead of 15. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek. "So do you," I replied. He handed me a glass of wine. Peach undertones, just chilled. Fog on the stem. He'd timed it. I let my fingers curl around the glass, but didn't raise it. "Wait," I said, lightly scanning past his shoulder. Right on cue, she entered. Blythe. Hair pinned up, emerald green dress, a shade too formal, a smile too wide. She greeted guests like she belonged. Then she saw me. "Oh, Marlo," she beamed, leaning in to hug. Her perfume hit like sugared poison, sweet, sharp, overpowering. "You look stunning," she said. "So do you," I answered, steady. She reached for a glass of wine from a passing tray. Same shape, same color. I watched her lift it, then pause as she juggled her clutch. In that moment, I stepped forward. "Oh, I think you grabbed mine by mistake," I said casually. "I'm weird about the stem style." She glanced down, smiled. "You are," she teased. And without hesitation, she traded glasses. Effortless. Grant stood beside her watching. Too still. I raised my glass, took a slow sip. Just bubbles. Peach, nothing more. She lifted hers, clinked it against his, then drank. And I watched his eyes not on me, on her. The dinner began like every other anniversary celebration we'd hosted. Polite toasts, laughs at inside jokes. A few photos from our early years projected on the rooftop screen. The first apartment. Ivy's first steps. That trip to Bainbridge Island. Grant held my hand. Blythe whispered something in his ear, then laughed too loudly. People assumed we were just 3 close friends. But I watched every tick, every flicker in Grant's gaze, every glance toward the glass in Blythe's hand, every shift in her posture. At first, nothing changed. Then, she blinked longer than usual. Her fingers stiffened on her fork. She reached for her napkin, but knocked over a spoon. Grant leaned toward her, his voice tight. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer. Her jaw slackened just a little. Her eyes scanned the table like she wasn't sure where she was. And that's when I saw it. Panic in him. He gripped her wrist. "Blythe." She coughed once, then again, clutched the table. I leaned back slightly, folded my napkin. Lifted my glass again, still untouched since that first sip. Conversations around us slowed, heads turned. She swayed in her chair. Grant rose halfway, one hand behind her back. Her breathing grew shallow, sharp. I stayed seated, calm, composed. From the outside, I looked like a woman mildly concerned for a guest. But inside, I was watching a performance unravel. He hadn't planned for this. He thought I'd be the one gasping. He thought she'd be the witness, not the victim. And I just kept watching. What would you do if the one meant to betray you started choking first? The air had changed. Blythe was swaying in her seat. Her fingers trembled on the linen napkin. Grant hovered behind her, whispering something I couldn't hear, but I could read the panic in his eyes. I stood, took my glass, tapped it once with a silver fork. The sharp clink rang across the rooftop. Conversations stilled, forks lowered, all eyes turned. "I just wanted to say a few words," I began. My voice didn't shake, my hands didn't tremble. I looked directly at Grant. "My husband has always believed in celebration," I said. "He says the best truths come out with champagne." A ripple of nervous laughter. "He's right." I let silence follow. Then I turned to the AV technician near the sound booth. "Can you switch to the other input, please? I have something I'd like to share." He nodded, pressed a button. The rooftop screen behind us flickered, then lit up. The first image, a reservation confirmation. Spa retreat. 2 names. Grant Ainsley, Blythe Kerrigan. Date 1 week ago. The room gasped. The second, an email thread. Blythe. "Are you sure this is safe?" Grant. "She won't even remember." Someone muttered, "What is this?" Then a grainy video, my purse camera, angle low but clear. Grant that very night reaching into his jacket. Fingers curling around a small vial, tilting something into a glass, his smile rehearsed. On screen, Blythe's hand entered frame. She reached for the glass, he handed it to her. She smiled, drank. Gasps exploded around the room. One woman stood. "Is this real?" Grant lunged forward. Marlo turned that off. He grabbed the AV table. Too late. People rose from their seats. Whispers turned into questions. Shock into outrage. Blythe collapsed fully now, her body slumping against the table. "Call 911, someone yelled. I didn't move, didn't flinch, just placed my own glass still half full down beside the silver tray. Paramedics were called. Blythe was lifted onto a stretcher, conscious, but dazed, her pupils blown wide. One medic asked what happened. She drank the wrong glass, I said. She drank the one he poured. Grant turned toward me, face pale, mouth open. You set this up. This is twisted. You're trying to frame me. I met his eyes. No, I said softly. You framed yourself. I just gave her what you made for me. 2 uniformed officers arrived within minutes. The technician handed over the USB copy from the DJ booth. I handed them the second. One officer turned to me. Are you safe, ma'am? Yes, I replied. Now I am. Sir, we'll need you to come with us for questioning. Grant's jaw clenched. You people don't understand, she's manipulating this. But he knew. He saw the footage. He saw the faces of his friends, his investors, his image dissolving like ice and fire. Then he did something I didn't expect. He ran. He shoved through this crowd, shattering a champagne tower as he sprinted for the terrace stairs. He made it 2 steps before the second officer tackled him flat. The rooftop erupted. Screams. A waiter dropped a tray. Someone spilled wine across a white silk dress. And me, I stood still, not victorious, not enraged, just finished. The mask had fallen, and not just for him. For all of them, people who once praised our love, who toasted our marriage as something enviable, now stared like they'd watched a murder and didn't know who to mourn. One of Grant's board members, a man who once called me the quiet force behind the genius, avoided my eyes entirely. Another whispered, I thought you were perfect together. I smiled, soft but steady. Perfect's easy to fake. Paramedics wheeled Blythe out. Oxygen mask pressed to her face. Her hand reached weakly for Grant. He didn't see it. He was already cuffed. As they led him past me, he looked up one last time. But there was no apology in his eyes, just disbelief. He never thought I'd be the one who won. He underestimated the quiet wife, the one who watched, calculated, documented, the one who stopped sipping and started serving. I stepped back, letting the chaos swirl. The music had stopped. But something else had begun. Clarity and justice. 2 things he never planned for. Some people started filming. I could see phones being raised behind trembling hands. Others whispered frantically, debating whether to step closer or leave before the press arrived. Then I heard it. A voice I hadn't expected. Marlo. I turned. It was Rachel, my closest friend since grad school, someone Grant had always referred to as too blunt for dinner parties. She looked at me, eyes glassy. You planned this, she asked quietly. I nodded. She didn't flinch. She stepped forward, gripped my hand. Good. Behind her, my mother-in-law stared, pale as lace. Her lips parted, but no words came. This was the woman who once told me, you're lucky to have a man like Grant. Now her gaze dropped, not in shame, in disbelief. Not at me, at him. Because even she couldn't spin this. One of Grant's business partners, a man who once toasted our unshakable love, stood frozen wine glass still in hand, trembling visibly. Another whispered, do you think she'll sue? As the police led Grant away, he passed within inches of me. For a moment I thought he might speak, say something, anything. But all he did was stare, not like a man betrayed, but like a man defeated by something he never imagined would fight back. Me. I watched until he disappeared into the stairwell. The sound of sirens outside rose, getting closer. Blythe was wheeled past me, her skin-washed-out eyes fluttering beneath the oxygen mask. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. The audience had already chosen who to believe. The projector flickered once, then went black. The lights above dimmed back to ambient gold. And just like that, the rooftop became quiet again. Not peaceful, just still. A silence no one knew how to break. Until, Mom, I turned sharply. It was Ivy at the entrance with Rachel's husband holding her hand. She hadn't seen the chaos. Rachel had brought her downstairs before the speech like we planned. I crossed the room, dropped to my knees, and wrapped her into my arms. She looked up at me, searching. Are you okay? She asked softly. I smiled. I am now. She nodded like she already knew. Children do. Rachel gave me a slight nod. We'll get her home. You stay. Finish this. I kissed Ivy's hair and watched them leave. Then slowly I stepped away from the lights, from the voices, from the eyes. I walked to the edge of the rooftop just past the last table where the view of the Willamette River opened wide under the night sky. Below, the red-blue flash of police lights danced against the pavement, reflected in the hotel's glass facade like fireflies gone mad. I stood there in silence. Let the cold settle into my collarbones. Let the weight of everything lift, not suddenly but piece by piece. Behind me, waitstaff whispered. One of them began cleaning the broken glass. A violinist packed her case with shaking fingers. But I raised the last of my untouched champagne and let it glint under the stars. To Clarity, I whispered, and drank. It tasted like nothing, which for the first time in a long time, felt like everything. Grant took a plea deal. 3 felony charges, attempted poisoning, fraud, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 5 years without parole. The board removed him the same week. Investors dropped out like dominoes. The company he built folded in under 3 months. His name vanished from press releases and appeared in the crime section instead. Blythe left Portland shortly after. Word was she moved back east. I didn't care where. She became a paragraph in a closed chapter. I never heard from her again. My attorney made sure every file was archived secure, silent waiting should anyone challenge what happened. But no one ever did. No one dared. As for me, I sold the house in Selwood. Too many rooms, too many memories warped by hindsight. Ivy and I moved South Ashland, small town, pine trees, clean air. She started at a new art school. She made friends, painted more. She stopped asking why her dad never called. And I started again, not from scratch, but from stillness. I took on a few quiet clients, women going through separation rebuilding after trust was broken, helping them protect their finances, understand their rights. I called it a second ledger, a space for women like me, the ones who didn't scream, didn't burn the house down, didn't need revenge and blood or fire. Just facts, boundaries, and a way forward. Sometimes people in Ashland recognize me. They pause, whisper, some look away. Others nod, not in pity, in recognition. One woman at the co-op said, "You gave so many of us permission to pay attention." I nodded, nothing more, because this was never about applause. It was about clarity. Grant tried to poison more than my body. He tried to erase my voice, and I gave it back to myself. I don't forgive him. I don't hate him. I simply no longer carry him. There's peace in that. Last week, Ivy and I walked through Lithia Park. She pointed at a duck pond and said, "This feels like breathing." She was right. It feels like I can breathe again. If you've ever been betrayed, if someone tried to rewrite your story, let this be your reminder. You don't have to drink what they pour. You don't have to go quietly. Sometimes the cleanest justice is simply telling the truth and surviving it.